Someday I'm going to preach a sermon on how Jesus used that child. Inappropriate, right, for us to use children to make a point? Children have enough struggles. When I was 8 years old, I loved to hang out with the two neighbor boys who were 2 years older than me, which at that time simply meant that they were more adventuresome. Whenever they were up for an adventure, I was game. One summer day, we, meaning they, decided to climb the neighbor's barn. Well, it was kind of like a garage, 10 or 12 feet up. I went along thinking, this will be fun, but I was a little scared. They boosted me up. You know how you do that with your hands and you boost? One was up pulling. We got up there. We looked around a little bit. I realized that things look a lot higher from up looking down than down looking up. And then they both jumped. I didn't want to jump. They kept coaxing me, encouraging, it'll be fine, you can jump, no worries, no worries. Well, how else was I going to get down? So I jumped, and I broke my arm. I didn't know I broke my arm at that time, but it hurt like HE double toothpicks, because that's what you say when you're 8 years old. I went home and tried to avoid my mom, who was packing for us to head back to the family cottage after a day of laundry and lawn mowing and all those sort of tasks. I ended up taking a nap. Tells you how much it was hurting. On the way to the cottage, I was miserable. Every bump hurt. When my dad arrived after work at the cottage, they decided that I had to go back in town to the emergency room. I was a little chagrined, embarrassed, but it hurt, like HE double toothpicks. I indeed had a broken arm. I was in a cast for 8 weeks, entering the 3rd grade, which is when you swim. You learn to swim at my school. I couldn't learn to swim. I also never learned to write cursive because I was writing with my left hand for the first 8 weeks of that school year. I did get my first taste of whiskey that night because there were no aspirin in the cottage. I felt, it was awful. It was awful. I remember that. I felt, in that moment, I felt safe and loved and a little embarrassed. James Barrie, Scottish writer of Peter Pan and other novels, said, "Life is a long lesson in humility." The word humility is derived from the Latin word humus, good soil, rich in nutrients, soil that's able to make even inept gardeners look good. Humus doesn't care where the credit goes. The same for humble people. Colleges do not offer courses entitled The History of Humility from the Renaissance to the Present. Wall Street will never report that humility gained an 8th or tumbled to new lows. William Bennett's book, The Book of Virtues, includes chapters on responsibility and courage and self-discipline and honesty and work, but nothing on humility. We could talk around humility for the length of this time, and I'd rather do something else because Jeff Boss of Forbes, a contributing writer in 2021, said, "Who doesn't want more humility?" And so he wrote an article, 13 Habits of Humble People. Buckle up. We'll be here till 3 o'clock. I'm just kidding. They're 5 seconds each. And there are things you know. But because, as Boss says, who doesn't want more humility, I want to invite you to grab onto one of these habits. Think about it for the next week or so and increase your own humility. 1, they're situationally aware. Situational awareness is a function of being able to see yourself accurately. This is a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique in which you do not only learn about other people and cultures, but also examine your beliefs and cultural identities. Do you see yourself accurately? Number 2, they retain relationships. Studies have shown that humble people are more likely to help their friends. As a result, they may maintain stronger relationships. How are your relationships? Number 3, they put others first. Humble people know their self-worth. C.S. Lewis, English author and great theologian, wrote, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less." Number 4, they make difficult decisions with ease. When faced with difficult decisions, humble people respect the moral and ethical boundaries that govern the decision and base their decision-making criteria on a sense of shared purpose rather than self-interest. How are you at making difficult decisions? Number 5, they listen. Humble people actively listen to others before summarizing the conversation and then, perhaps, sharing their ideas. How are you at listening? Number 6, they're curious. Humble people seek knowledge because they're perpetual learners, and they realize they don't have all the answers. They glean knowledge from the experiences of others and crave more opportunities to learn. When was the last time you asked a question? Number 7, they speak their minds. Humble people aren't afraid to name their truth because being wrong is not a fear they have. Are you afraid of being wrong? Number 8, they take time to say thank you. Humble people take the time to express thanks even for little things. How often do you say thanks? Number 9, they have an abundance mentality. Humble people know there's plenty of opportunity to go around, and that finding it just necessitates collaboration and communication. Do you think large or small? Number 10, they start sentences with you rather than I. Humble people put others at the forefront of their thoughts. Humble people brag about others instead of about themselves. Who can you brag about this week? Number 11, they accept feedback. Humble people are not only receptive to constructive criticism, but actively seek it because they know that feedback is a path to improvement. Do you accept feedback? Number 12, they assume responsibility. Rather than blaming the system or the behaviors of others, humble people assume responsibility by owning their part. They have an ability to acknowledge personal mistakes and limitations. Where do you assume responsibility? Number 13, they ask for help. Part of being humble means realizing you don't have all the answers. Humble people acknowledge what they do and do not know and enlist help for the latter. Can you ask for help? And then there's a 14th one, because in all the reading I did this week, this one was not included in Jeff Boss's list. So number 14, humble people value all things. For the humble person, all things are important, integral to the well-being of the world. They can see the holy in all things. We might call them panentheists, seeing God in all. In preparation for an interview on the Oprah Winfrey Show, Nelson Mandela, who was to be the guest that day, asked the producer what the subject of the show might be. The producer said, "Nelson Mandela, you're the subject of the show." In a YouTube clip, which I invite you to go look at, Google Nelson and Oprah, and you'll find it. Oprah asks Mandela, what do you do to stay humble? Mandela said something like this: "You have a limited time on earth. You must try to use that time for the purpose of transformation. Focus on the positive things. It was not the individual Mandela who did this. I want to destroy the myth that I was something other than a normal human being. You have to be honest with yourself. You can't have impact if you haven't changed yourself. Humility is the most important quality you must have." Max Dupree, business leader of Herman Miller fame, author of several books, including Leading Without Power and Called to Serve, which I read in seminary, wrote the quote at the top of your program: "We cannot become what we want to be by remaining what we are." Speaking about organizations, if we as an organization want to become all that we can be, we cannot remain who we are. We must become a learning organization. We must develop and maintain a sense of humility, an accurate perception of ourselves, that we are something. We are learned and wise. We are inclusive and gracious and loving. We are a strong community with deep experience. We have many gifts and strengths. And we aren't all that. We may need new eyes to see what the next invitation is. If we are to become what we want to be, we cannot remain who we are. Amen? Amen.